Franz Liszt was both the world's first virtuoso piano player and the world's first rock star. The talented, handsome, debonair artist made women all over Europe swoon at his electrifying piano performances. And Liszt loved the attention of so many beautiful, rich women. Lola Montez was a sexy, sensuous, celebrated Spanish dancer. And Lola's reputation was that whatever Lola wanted, Lola got. They were both performing during the same week in Dresden, Germany in 1843. The Franz Liszt recital had been sold out for months, but Lola, using her charm and her intelligence, managed to get a ticket and a seat right up front. Lola happens to sit next to Marie Dagoult, one of Liszt's former lovers. Madame Dagoult notices Lola's beauty and her intensity directed at Liszt during his performance. At the recital's end, they strike up a conversation, and Marie Dagoult agrees to deliver a note to Liszt with Lola's name and hotel. Liszt remembers noticing Lola, and the very next day he calls on her at her hotel. So began one of the many stories that Lola Montez would tell the gritty 49er gold miners being entertained at her home in the gold fields of Grass Valley, California. In California, the Klamath Mountains, the Cascade Range, and the Sierra Nevada Mountains surround the Sacramento Valley and the San Joaquin Valley. Gold was found in 1848 in the waterways and the tributaries running through the foothills of these mountains and into the valleys. The hunt for gold is over, but the valleys are still rich agricultural areas. Liszt was a worldly, mature 32 years old, and Lola was a hot-tempered 22. They rendezvous frequently on their performance tours. Their relationship is a stormy one because they are both jealous of each other's many admirers. They traveled together to Paris, the city of light, where Liszt introduces Lola to his friends, many of them intellectuals and impresarios who arrange performances for Lola. The towering literary figure in France, Victor Hugo, and the Polish-born musical genius, Frédéric Chopin, and Lucille Dupin, who had to write with a pen name, George Sand, because society did not accept female writers at that time. Lola Montez was a sponge for the knowledge of the intellectuals and the artists of Paris. Lola dances at the most prestigious venues in Paris with great success. Liszt tires of Lola's public jealous outbursts, and he decides to end the affair. While she sleeps, he locks Lola in a hotel room and leaves a hefty sum of money with the management for the damage that he knows she will cause, and he leaves Paris on an extended tour. Lola was tough-minded and fearless. It was in Paris that she started carrying a cowhide whip to ward off unwelcome advances. It became her trademark. She was also known to carry a small pistol. Lola stays on in Paris and continues to socialize with the Paris elite. And after months of healing, she meets Alexandre Dujardin. Dujardin was the gifted, popular leader of the Republican Party in Paris, and he was the editor of La Presse, the first street newspaper in France. Lola and Dujardin confess their love for each other. They are inseparable in the autumn of 1844. They live together in one of his houses. They agree to marry in the spring. Then tragedy strikes. Lola receives an urgent message from Dujardin, which reads, "My dear Lola, I am going out to fight with pistols. This explains why I did not come to see you this morning. I have need of all my calmness. At 2 o'clock, all will be over. 1,000 embraces, my dear Lola, my good little wife, whom I love so much, and the thoughts of whom will never leave me." Lola received the corpse from the carriage and made funeral arrangements. Dujardin's will left her the bulk of his estate, which amounted to over $100,000. Lola settled the estate and gave every dollar of it to Dujardin's relatives. Beauvalon, the shooter, was put on trial for murder, and at his trial, Lola electrified the standing room only audience when she testified that everyone knew that Dujardin was a bad shot, and then she stated, "I would have fought him in a duel myself." Lola decided to leave Paris, to get away from the sights and sounds that reminded her of what she thought was the loss of the love of her life. She was on her way to her greatest personal triumph that would shake up the European establishment, and beyond that, she would experience her greatest personal tragedy. But some years later, as she sailed into San Francisco Bay on one of the first paddle steamships from Panama City, after the hazardous overland journey across the isthmus, Lola would meet on board the overcrowded boat of anxious, gold-seeking men another newspaper man who she would wed at the Church of Mission Dolores in San Francisco. John Augustus Sutter was the dad and the granddad of the California 49er gold rush. Although he owned the property where gold was discovered, he never profited from the gold find, and as a matter of fact, the gold find led to his ruin. John Sutter was born in 1803 in a small town called Kadern, which is in Germany but on the Swiss border. He was actually raised in Switzerland because his father was a Swiss citizen. As a young man, Sutter joins the military and rises to the rank of captain in a Swiss artillery unit. In 1826, he marries Annette de Belde, the daughter of a wealthy widow, and they have 4 children. He is unsuccessful at business and racks up heavy debts. In 1834, to escape going to jail, he left his family behind and fled to the New World. Although his native language was German, he learned Spanish and English before leaving Switzerland. He also had a facility in French, and he left with a French passport. After arriving in America, Sutter headed west, first stopping in Missouri, where he worked for several years as a merchant and innkeeper. His dream of being a land baron kept him moving westward. In April of 1830, he joined a trapping party on its way to the Pacific coast. The traders reached Vancouver in October of that year. Unable to leave for California immediately, Sutter got work on a ship headed for the Sandwich Islands, Hawaii, and came to Honolulu. When Sutter arrived in Northern California in July of 1840, it was Mexican territory called Alta California. He and his party of mostly Germans and Hawaiians docked in Yerba Buena, San Francisco, which was then a small fishing village with a population of around 500 inhabitants. Sutter and his party were soon on a ship, exploring the lands and the tributaries that emptied into the San Francisco Bay. Sutter realized that in order to gain possession of property in Mexico, he had to become a Mexican citizen, and he became one in 1840. In 1841, he went to Monterey, the capital of Alta California, and negotiated with Governor Alvarado for a land grant. A Mexican land grant was given to John Sutter by the governor on June 18, 1841, for over 40,000 acres of Sacramento Valley land, which included the joining of the American and Sacramento rivers and the ever-fertile lands of the Delta. Swiss pioneer John Sutter named his 47,827-acre property New Helvetia, New Switzerland. Fort Ross was a Russian colonial property started in 1812, and it was located along the northwestern coast of Alta California. It was started to get furs and agricultural products in support of the larger Russian settlement in Sitka, Alaska, where Russians had extensive fur trading and whaling operations. Fort Ross was the site of California's first windmills and shipbuilding. Russian scientists associated with the colony were among the first to record California's cultural and natural history. For example, Russian naturalists selected the poppy as the California flower. The Fort Ross settlement was a mixed blessing for the local Miwok Indians, who benefited from the trade and innovations, but were also severely affected by smallpox, measles, and other European diseases traced to the settlement. In 1837, a very deadly epidemic of smallpox wiped out a whole swath of Native Americans in the immediate area. The Russians introduced many European innovations into Alta California, such as all-wood housing and glass windows. The Fort Ross settlement's 9,000 acres was home to the Russian Empire's peoples. Russians, Poles, Finns, Ukrainians, Estonians, and numerous other nationalities and ethnic groups, including the native Alaskan Aleuts and the Creoles, those of mixture of Aleut and Russian ancestry. When John Sutter was working his way to Alta California, he traveled to Sitka, Alaska, when he joined a fur trapping group. In 1841, John Sutter learned of the Russian-American company's intentions to abandon their Fort Ross settlement. In 1842, Sutter struck a deal with them to obtain the property for an IOU of $30,000. Russian historians assert even today the sum was never paid. Therefore, legal title of the settlement was never transferred to Sutter and still belongs to the Russian people. Sutter family representatives asserted that a payment was made for $19,788 in notes and gold on April 13, 1849. The Russians issued a commemorative stamp in 2012 celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Fort Ross and Bodega Bay settlement. The Miwok Indians have stated that their agreement with the Russians is perhaps the only treaty between Euro-Americans and Indians that was honored. John Sutter wasted no time mounting the cannon from the Fort Ross deal at Sutter's Fort. They proved to be very effective deterrents to Fort Sutter being attacked. But the Sutter gun, as they were called, would cause John Sutter to be captured, put on trial for treason, found guilty, and sentenced to be hanged. It's now 1846 in the life of Lola Montez, who was performing to record crowds. She was made famous all over Europe by her well-publicized affair with Franz Liszt, her fiery temper, her association with the leading intellectuals of Europe, and the false perception that a prominent man died fighting a duel for her honor. The Dujurier duel in Paris actually involved a political vendetta. Lola mentions in her memoirs that it seemed that everyone wanted to come and see what all the fuss was about.
Bye.
And perhaps that was the case with the Viceroy of Poland, who came to one of her Warsaw appearances. In 1846, the Tsar of Russia was sovereign over Poland, and he made Major General Ivan Paskovich Viceroy of Poland. The general had distinguished himself in battle for the Russian Tsar, and he was appointed Viceroy as reward. The Viceroy position made the general the most powerful and richest man in Poland. He had the power of taxation and the power of being judge, jury, and executioner over every being in Poland. Although the general was married, after seeing Lola perform, he wanted Lola Montez for his own. He sent an emissary to her, offering her a villa and wealth for life. Lola politely refused. He then summoned Lola to his castle. Lola refused to go, but was told in no uncertain terms by people she trusted that it was not wise to refuse the Viceroy's summons. And after the Viceroy's elaborate display of power and pomp at the castle, Lola again politely refused his offer to be his mistress. The very next night at the theater, while Lola was performing her famous signature spider dance, a group of scoundrels in the audience heckled her. Lola, who was furious at the obvious source of the display, controlled her temper until she got off stage. She then seethed backstage. The very next night there was a repetition, and Lola had had enough. She stopped her performance and denounced the heckling group as being connected to the Viceroy, and that their actions were because she refused to be the Viceroy's mistress. And it seemed that just at that moment, the Poles, who had for quite some time been intimidated by the Viceroy's power and threats, had had their fill of the Viceroy's dictatorial ways, and that for him to so treat this talented actress visiting Poland was the very last straw. In a historic moment of defiance, the audience set themselves upon the hecklers and threw them out of the theater. Afterwards, Lola, from the stage, profusely thanked the audience to their sustained applause. And then she continued with her dance. When she finished her performance, there was a prolonged standing ovation. Overnight, all of Poland learned of the incident, and there were worries that the Viceroy would take his revenge on Lola Montez. He was known to violently crush any dissent to his rule. Lola could be made to disappear at any moment. For the remaining days of her performances in Poland, Lola had a platoon of men who guarded her 24/7. The big question was, how could she cross the border where she had to get past the viceroy's men? In the company of the French chargé d'affaires officer, Lola Montez exited Poland under the diplomatic protection of the French embassy. Lola would recount that story at many of her salon events for potential investors in the Empire Gold Mine in Grass Valley, California. That story, more than any other, endeared her for life to John Sutter, who spoke fluent French, had a Swiss-French wife, and who, you will remember, fled from Switzerland with a French passport.